The trap. The forest was completely dark. Not the kind of darkness that comes when the lights are turned off. This was different. There were no distant headlights. No houses glowing between the trees. No sounds of traffic somewhere beyond the hills. Only trees. Endless rows of them packed tightly together, their branches forming a ceiling that swallowed what little moonlight managed to reach the ground. A hunter moved through that darkness with a flashlight in one hand and a rifle slung over his shoulder. He had been walking for almost an hour. He wasn't lost. He knew exactly where he was going. Earlier that evening, he had placed a wire trap near a narrow animal trail that disappeared between two large oak trees. The trail was used regularly by deer, coyotes, and occasionally something larger. He had expected to find an animal caught in it. Instead, he found the trap empty. The wire had been broken. The hunter crouched beside it and examined the damage. At first, he thought someone had cut it. Then he saw the metal. It hadn't been cut. It had been torn apart. The ends of the wire were twisted backward as though something had grabbed them and pulled with tremendous force. The hunter slowly stood. Behind him, a branch snapped. He turned. His flashlight swept across the trees. Nothing. He waited. The forest remained still. He laughed quietly at himself. Just an animal. He turned back toward the trap. And for one brief moment, something stood behind him. Something enormous. The flashlight didn't illuminate its face. It only caught the outline of a body that seemed far too tall and far too broad to belong to any ordinary animal. The hunter froze. His breathing stopped. The shadow moved. The flashlight fell from his hand. It hit the dirt and rolled onto its side, its beam spinning between the trees. The hunter screamed. The scream ended abruptly. Then there was nothing. Only the flashlight. Only the trees. And on a nearby branch, a small red light continued blinking. A trail camera. It had been recording everything. And nobody would find the memory card for a very long time. Part 1. The house. Ethan Hale had spent most of his adult life learning how to notice things other people ignore. The door that hadn't been fully closed. A footprint that didn't belong. A window left open 3 inches too far. The subtle change in someone's voice when they were about to lie. It was the kind of training that never really left you. Even after you stopped needing it. Even after you wanted it to. That was why, when Ethan drove down the dirt road toward the house he had recently purchased, he noticed almost immediately that there was nothing around him. No neighboring houses. No utility buildings. No distant porch lights. Nothing. The road stretched behind him for miles, disappearing into farmland before eventually reaching the main highway. Ahead was the forest. The house sat directly beside it. Ethan slowed the truck. He had seen photographs before buying the property. The photographs had made the place look peaceful. That was the word the real estate agent had used. Peaceful. Private. Secluded. Now that Ethan was actually standing there, he thought a different word fit better. Empty. He parked beside the house and turned off the engine. For several seconds, he remained behind the wheel. He stared through the windshield. The house was old, but structurally sound. Wooden siding, a wide porch, 2 floors, a chimney that leaned slightly to one side. Behind it, the forest began only a few yards from the back porch. Ethan finally stepped outside. The silence immediately surrounded him. He looked toward the trees. Nothing moved. His phone vibrated. He looked down. There was a message from Mara. He opened it. He stopped reading. He locked the phone, put it in his pocket, and walked inside. The house smelled like old wood and dust. Most of the rooms were empty. His belongings were still packed inside cardboard boxes stacked along the walls. Ethan walked through the house slowly. He checked the windows, then the locks, then the doors. Not because he believed there was danger, because he had always done that. He had spent 12 years in law enforcement. 12 years entering places where something had already gone wrong. 12 years learning that the first thing you did when entering a room was determine how you would leave it. He stopped in the living room. An old wooden beam crossed the ceiling. 2 letters had been carved into it. Ethan ran his fingers across them, then continued walking. Near the fireplace, he placed a small photograph. A boy sat on Ethan's shoulders. The child couldn't have been more than 7. He was laughing. Ethan stared at the photograph for several seconds, then turned it slightly toward the room. He didn't look at it again. Over the next several days, Ethan settled it into the house. He unpacked slowly. He hung curtains. He arranged the kitchen. He chopped firewood. He ate alone at a table designed for 4 people. 3 chairs remained untouched. At night, he read on the porch until the sunlight disappeared behind the trees. He slept with his bedroom door open. He told himself it was because the house was unfamiliar. He knew that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that he didn't like closed doors anymore. Closed doors meant there was something on the other side that you couldn't see. And Ethan had spent too many years opening doors after people told him not to. For 6 nights, nothing happened. Then came the 7th. Ethan was asleep when he heard footsteps outside. Slow, heavy, measured. They moved around the house. Once, from the front porch, along the side wall, then behind the bedroom. Ethan opened his eyes. He didn't move. The footsteps stopped. He waited. Nothing. Eventually, he convinced himself it was a deer. He closed his eyes. The following night, it happened again. This time the footsteps stopped directly beneath his bedroom window. Ethan sat up. He listened. There was breathing outside. Slow breathing. Deliberate breathing. Whatever was standing there wasn't trying to hide. Ethan remained perfectly still. Then the breathing stopped. The footsteps moved away. He didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, he went outside. There were footprints in the mud beneath the window. At first glance, they looked almost human. But they were too large and too deep. At the front of each print were marks resembling claws. Ethan followed them. 10 steps. 20. 30. Then he stopped. Every footprint pointed toward the house. There were no footprints leading away. None. Whatever had walked there had arrived at the house. But there was no evidence that it had ever left. Ethan stood in the yard for a long time. Then he went inside and locked the back door. For the first time since moving in, the nearest town was 40 minutes away. Ethan drove there that afternoon. He stopped at a hardware store and bought 2 outdoor security cameras. The man behind the counter was old enough to remember when the store had first opened. His name was Paul. When Ethan gave him the address, Paul's expression changed. "You bought the Marsh place?" Ethan looked up. "The house has a name." Paul shook his head. "Not officially." "Then what?" "Marsh Place." Ethan waited. Paul didn't explain. "Who was Marsh?" "Elias." "Elias what?" Paul hesitated. "Just Elias." Ethan studied him. "What happened to him?" Paul looked toward the window. "No one knows for sure." "Was he a criminal?" "No." "A hunter?" "Sometimes." Ethan waited. Paul handed him the receipt. $41.80. The conversation was over. Ethan took the bag. As he turned to leave, Paul spoke again. "You used to work law enforcement?" Ethan stopped. "Why?" "Your posture." Paul smiled faintly. "You have that look." "What look?" "The kind people get after they've spent too many years expecting something bad to happen." Ethan said nothing. Paul's smile disappeared. "Keep that look when you're out there." Ethan left. He didn't understand what Paul meant. Not yet. That evening, Ethan installed the cameras. One faced the forest. The other faced the back porch. He connected both to his phone. Then he checked the feed. The screen showed an empty yard. Trees. Darkness. Nothing else. Ethan went to bed. At 2:41 in the morning, the camera recorded a man walking out of the forest. He was thin. Dirty. His clothes were torn. He walked toward the house without hesitation. He stopped near the porch, looked at the windows, then walked around the building. At one point, he crouched and pressed his face close to the ground, as if smelling something. Then he suddenly ran. He disappeared into the trees. But for one frame, something else appeared. A second figure, much larger, standing behind him, watching. The camera recorded it for less than a second. Then the frame changed. Ethan slept through the entire thing. The next morning, he watched the recording. Once. Then again. Then a third time. He slowed the footage. Stopped it. Rewound. The image was poor. The second figure was almost impossible to see. Ethan zoomed in. It looked like a tree. Probably a tree. He watched it again. He didn't believe that. He called the sheriff. The sheriff listened, then told him there was no evidence of a crime. Ethan asked if anyone had reported trespassing in the area. The sheriff said no. Ethan hung up. That afternoon, he drove to the property of his nearest neighbor. Her name was Mrs. Okafor. She was in her 70s and had lived in the area for decades. Ethan showed her the photograph of the footprints. She stared at it. For a long time. You bought Marsh's house. Ethan sighed. Everyone keeps saying that. Do you know what happened to Elias? No. He used to hunt. I heard. He said something was following him. Ethan smiled faintly. A coyote. The Aquifer looked toward the forest. No. What did he say? She answered quietly. That it wasn't a coyote. Ethan waited. The Aquifer continued. Don't go into that forest after dark. Why? She looked directly at him. Because whatever lives there knows that house better than you do. Ethan looked toward the trees. Then back at her. Did Elias ever find it? The Aquifer didn't answer. Instead she said something Ethan didn't understand. You didn't move there because you wanted peace. Ethan's expression hardened. She continued. You moved there because you wanted to be alone. He said nothing. And sometimes, she said, being alone doesn't make your problems disappear. She looked toward the forest again. Sometimes it gives them room. Part 2. The capture. The footsteps continued. Night after night. Sometimes they stopped outside Ethan's bedroom. Sometimes they circled the house. Sometimes there was nothing at all. That was almost worse. Because Ethan could never tell whether the silence meant the thing was gone. Or watching. On the 12th night, Ethan sat on the back porch with the lights off. He held a flashlight in one hand. He didn't turn it on. He was listening. Then he heard a branch break. He looked toward the forest. Between two trees stood a man. The figure was barely visible. Ethan stared. The man stared back. Neither moved. Then the figure stepped backward. And disappeared. That was enough. Ethan went inside. He began building a trap. Not a weapon. A capture system. A heavy net. A pulley. Ropes. Weights. A camera. He spent hours designing it. He didn't know exactly what he was trying to catch. But he needed answers. At the end of the night, he placed his pistol nearby. He stared at it. Then at the trap. I just want to know what you are. He paused. Then quietly added. I want to know what anything really is before I have to find out after it's too late. The following night, the trap activated. Ethan woke at 3:17 in the morning. He grabbed his flashlight and pistol and ran outside. Something was struggling inside the net. A man. Not a creature. A man. He was thin. Dirty. His clothes were torn. A deep cut ran along his leg. It was the same man from the camera. Ethan pointed the gun. Don't move. The man froze. His breathing was heavy. For a moment, something strange crossed his face. His teeth showed. His expression became almost animalistic. Then he forced himself to calm down. Okay. Ethan kept the gun trained on him. Who are you? The man looked at him. Then at the house. You live here? Hale. Fear appeared in the man's eyes. Not relief. Pear. You shouldn't be here. Ethan dragged the man inside. His name was Daniel. Ethan treated the wound. Then handcuffed him to a pipe near the heater. He placed his pistol on the kitchen counter. Close enough to reach. Far enough away that Daniel couldn't. "You want me to call the sheriff?" Daniel nodded. "Go ahead." Ethan studied him. "You've been trespassing on my property." "I know." "You've been watching my house." "I know." "You've been walking around outside my bedroom." Daniel looked down. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." "That's not what I asked." Daniel remained silent. Ethan waited. Eventually Daniel said, "You need to leave. This house isn't yours." "I know." "Then why do you keep coming back?" Daniel looked at him. "Because I don't have anywhere else." Ethan didn't believe him. Daniel continued. "You think I'm the thing you've been hearing, aren't you?" "No." "You expect me to believe that?" Daniel looked toward the window. "No." Ethan noticed the wound on Daniel's leg. "You should be in a hospital. It'll heal." "It won't." "How?" "It won't." "It will." Ethan stared at him. Daniel lowered his eyes. "Some wounds don't stay wounds." Ethan said nothing. After a few minutes, Daniel added, "I'm not what you should be afraid of." Ethan almost laughed. "You were snarling at me in a net 5 minutes ago." "I was scared. You looked like an animal." Daniel looked at him. Sometimes fear makes people become things they don't recognize. Ethan remembered that sentence. He would remember it for the rest of his life. They stayed awake until morning. Ethan asked questions. Daniel answered some. Avoided others. He said he had been living in the forest for several weeks. He said he had been avoiding people. He said he had been following someone. Ethan asked who. Daniel didn't answer. Police? No. Someone you owe money to. Daniel smiled bitterly. I wish. Then who? Daniel looked toward the window. Something worse. Ethan leaned forward. You've lied to me 3 times tonight. I know. Then tell me the truth. Daniel's face changed. For the first time, Ethan saw genuine terror. You're not going to believe me. Pride. Daniel shook his head. Not yet. Not yet. You aren't supposed to know yet. Who decides when I know? Daniel looked at him. Maybe it isn't up to us. The next morning, Daniel's wound looked different. The bleeding had stopped. The swelling had gone down. Ethan stared. Daniel noticed. I told you. What are you? Daniel looked away. Sell the house. I just bought it. Sell it. Why? Because this place isn't empty. Ethan stared at him. What does that mean? Daniel looked toward the forest. I've had this conversation before. With who? Daniel didn't answer. Ethan remembered the locked drawer. The initials on the ceiling. Damn. He forced the drawer open. Inside were old papers. Keys. A leather-bound journal. The initials E.M. were carved into the cover. Ethan carried it into the living room. Daniel saw it. His face went pale. Where did you get that? It was in the drawer. You shouldn't open it. Why? Because some things are better left unknown. Ethan opened the journal. Daniel looked away. The journal belonged to Elias Marsh. The first entries were ordinary. Weather. Hunting. Repairs. The condition of the property. Then Ethan found a different entry. Years earlier, Elias described being attacked in the mountains. He wrote that he had been bitten. He believed it was rabies. Then he wrote that it wasn't. Ethan kept reading. Elias described nights when his body changed. He described losing control. He described waking up far from home with no memory of how he got there. Then the entries became more frightened. Elias wrote about hunting people. About men disappearing. About learning that isolation made it easier. No one asked questions when a solitary man disappeared. No family nearby. No friends. No one waiting. Ethan stopped reading. He looked at Daniel. How did you get involved? Daniel remained silent. Ethan turned another page. Then he found a name. Daniel. The handwriting was shaking. Elias wrote that one man had survived an attack. A hunter. Daniel. If he was still alive, Elias believed he would eventually become the same thing. Ethan looked up. Daniel was staring at him. How long have you known? Daniel answered quietly. Years. You knew Elias? How? He attacked you. How? And you survived. How? Ethan closed the journal. Then what is he? Daniel looked at him. You already know. Ethan didn't answer. Daniel whispered. Oh, Werewolf. Part 3. The full moon. The moon would be full that night. Ethan noticed the date on his phone. Daniel noticed his expression. Tonight. Ethan looked at him. Tonight what? Daniel stood. I need you to do something. What? Lock me in the shed. Ethan stared. What? Lock me inside. No. You have to. Why? Because tonight I won't be able to control myself. Ethan didn't move. Daniel stepped closer. You need to understand something. His voice was shaking. The thing inside me isn't a metaphor. Ethan said nothing. When the moon rises, I won't be Daniel anymore. You expect me to believe that? You don't have to believe me. Daniel looked toward the door. You only have to lock it. That evening, Daniel stood outside the shed. The sun was disappearing. His hands were shaking. Sweat covered his face. Ethan noticed. You look sick. I am. How long does it last? Until sunrise. What happens during it? Daniel looked at him. I don't remember everything. Then how do you know what you do? Because I remember enough. He swallowed. I remember people. Ethan understood. Daniel continued. I remember faces. Have you killed anyone? Daniel didn't answer. That was answer enough. Ethan unlocked the shed. Daniel walked inside. Then turned. Whatever you hear, don't open the door. What if you call for help? Don't. What if you're hurt? Don't. What if you beg? Daniel looked directly into Ethan's eyes. Especially then. Ethan closed the door, locked it, then stepped back. For several minutes, nothing happened. Daniel was silent. Then he screamed. Ethan froze. Another scream. Something struck the wall. Then came a sound Ethan had never heard before. Bones moving. Not breaking. Changing. The sound made Ethan step backward. Inside the shed, Daniel screamed again. Then everything went quiet. Ethan approached the window. He looked through the gap between the boards. Daniel was on the floor. His body was changing. His arms were longer. His back was bent at an impossible angle. His hands were no longer human. Ethan stumbled backward. Daniel's head lifted. His eyes found Ethan through the darkness. Then the creature inside the shed roared. Ethan ran. He reached the house and locked every door. He grabbed the journal. The pages suddenly seemed different. Every word had become evidence. Every warning had become a confession. He read until he reached the final entries. Elias had written about another creature. Daniel. He wrote that Daniel had escaped him. That Daniel had resisted. That Daniel had tried to stay away from people. But Elias believed Daniel would always return. Because something about the curse drew them back. Back to the place where it began. Back to the person who changed them. Back home. Ethan looked toward the shed. The noise had stopped. Then something struck the door. Once. Twice. 3 times. Ethan raised his gun. The door didn't open. Instead, he heard Daniel's voice. He's here. Ethan froze. No. A long pause. Then. Elias. Ethan walked toward the window. At the edge of the forest stood a figure. Tall. Broad. Still. Ethan knew immediately. It wasn't Daniel. The creature slowly stepped into the moonlight. It was older. Scarred. Its movements were controlled. It looked toward the house. Not like an animal. Like a man returning to a place he once owned. Ethan watched it. Then the creature turned toward the shed. Daniel began pounding on the door. Not trying to escape. Warning him. Ethan. The voice was distorted. Ethan, he's here. The creature moved. It disappeared into the trees. Daniel explained everything after the transformation ended. Elias had been hunting in the area for years. He had learned that people who lived alone were easier targets. Then Daniel had survived an attack. He had become like Elias. But Daniel refused to accept what he had become. Every month he tried to isolate himself. He stayed away from people. He stayed away from towns. He stayed away from roads. But eventually the curse always brought him back. To the house. To Elias. To the beginning. Why does he want you? Ethan asked. Daniel looked exhausted. Because he doesn't want another wolf on his territory. You mean he'll kill you? If he can. And if he can't? Daniel looked at Ethan. Then he'll find someone else. Ethan understood. Me. Daniel didn't answer. That night, Ethan realized something. The footprints. The cameras. The footsteps. The man in the forest. None of it had been random. Elias had been watching the house. But he hadn't been watching Daniel. He had been watching Ethan. Daniel had brought him here. Or perhaps the curse had. Either way, Ethan was now part of it. Part 4. The Hunt. Elias appeared again the following night. This time Ethan saw him clearly. The creature stood at the edge of the yard. It didn't attack. It simply watched. Then it walked away. Ethan watched through the window. Why didn't he come inside? Daniel answered. Because he doesn't have to. What does that mean? He knows you're afraid. I'm not afraid. Daniel looked at him. You're holding a loaded gun with both hands. Ethan looked down. He hadn't realized. Daniel continued. Fear isn't always screaming. He looked toward the forest. Sometimes fear is the part of you that starts preparing before you understand why. Ethan thought about his life. About his career. About the boy in the photograph. About the reason he had bought a house in the middle of nowhere. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe Ethan hadn't come here to escape anything. Maybe he had come here because he believed isolation was punishment. Maybe he thought if he was alone long enough, he would eventually stop remembering. But memory didn't need company. It followed him. Every night. Every morning. Into every room. And now something else had followed him too. Ethan made a plan. He couldn't kill Elias. He couldn't control Daniel. But perhaps he could use one against the other. Daniel understood immediately. You want to let me out? How? And you want Elias to follow me? How? You don't know what will happen. No. Daniel laughed quietly. That's the most honest thing you've said. Ethan unlocked the shed. Daniel stood inside. He was already changing. Ethan. What? If I don't come back human, don't let me inside. Ethan nodded. Daniel stepped outside. Then he looked at him. For what it's worth. He stopped. What? You're not the first person to come here because you wanted to disappear. Ethan stared. Daniel continued. The difference is that you still have a choice. Then he ran into the forest. A second figure followed. Elias. The forest swallowed both. Ethan waited. Minutes passed. Then he heard a roar. Another. Branches snapped. Something crashed through the trees. Then silence. Ethan waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Total. Finally, a figure appeared. Daniel. Human again. Barely. He was bleeding. His clothes were torn. He could barely stand. Ethan opened the door. Daniel stumbled inside. Ethan helped him sit. Did you kill him? Daniel shook his head. No. Where is he? Somewhere out there. You didn't see him? I did. What happened? Daniel looked toward the window. He was stronger. Ethan stared at him. Then why did you come back? Daniel smiled faintly. Because I always do. Ethan bandaged Daniel's wounds. They sat in silence. Then Daniel looked at Ethan's hand. Wait. Ethan looked down. What? Your hand. Ethan saw a small scratch across his knuckle. What about it? Daniel became pale. How did you get that? I don't remember. Daniel stared at the wound. I do. Ethan looked at him. What? 2 nights ago. Daniel's voice became quieter. When you were treating my arm. Ethan remembered. His hand had slipped. Daniel had flinched. You scratched me. I barely touched you. That's what I thought. Daniel looked at the wound. But it was enough. Ethan's stomach tightened. What are you saying? Daniel didn't answer. Ethan stood. Daniel. Daniel looked at him. I think you need to leave. Why? Because if you're right. Daniel interrupted. It's already too late. Part 5. The last night. Morning came. Daniel stood on the porch. He looked healthier. But Ethan knew better now. The wound on Daniel's leg was nearly gone. The cuts on his face had faded. His body healed quickly. Too quickly. Daniel prepared to leave. Ethan watched him. You could stay. Daniel shook his head. No. We could figure this out. There's nothing to figure out. You survive. Surviving isn't the same as being cured. Ethan looked down at his hand. The scratch had almost healed. He didn't like that. Daniel saw his expression. Watch yourself. What does that mean? Watch your body. Ethan said nothing. Watch your sleep. Daniel continued. Watch your temper. He stepped toward the road. And watched the moon. Ethan followed him. Why are you leaving? Daniel stopped. Because Elias is hurt. And when something like him is hurt, it goes home. Ethan looked toward the house. Daniel continued. Sometimes home is a place. Sometimes it's a person. Ethan felt cold. Daniel walked away. He didn't look back. Ethan watched until he disappeared. Then he went inside. He began packing. Everything went back into boxes. The house suddenly felt smaller. The forest seemed closer. He packed the journal. He packed the photograph. He didn't know why he kept it. He simply couldn't throw it away. Eventually, he stood in front of the bathroom mirror. He had avoided mirrors since arriving. Now he forced himself to look. His face looked normal. Tired. Pale. But normal. He almost laughed. Maybe Daniel had been wrong. Maybe he was simply exhausted. Maybe the scratch meant nothing. He turned away. Then stopped. Something had moved in the mirror. Ethan looked back. Nothing. Only his reflection. He stared at himself. Brown eyes. Normal face. Normal skin. He looked away again. For a fraction of a second, his reflection seemed to keep looking. Then it was normal again. Ethan didn't notice. That night, he went to bed earlier than usual. He planned to leave at sunrise. He slept quickly. At 2:41 in the morning, he woke. A footstep sounded outside. Ethan opened his eyes. He remembered the first night. The same time. The same sound. He reached for his phone. The camera showed an empty porch. Nothing. He switched to the rear camera. A figure stood at the edge of the forest. Elias. Alive. On it. One leg dragging slightly. Ethan zoomed in. Elias wasn't looking at the house. He was looking at the forest, as if deciding whether to return. Ethan lowered the phone. He remembered Daniel's words. The wounded always return home. Then he heard something. Behind him. Inside the house. A soft scraping sound. Ethan froze. He slowly turned. Nothing. The sound came again. A claw moving across the wooden floor. Not outside. And inside. Ethan's breathing stopped. He looked toward the bedroom doorway. Nothing stood there. The sound came from behind him. Closer. Ethan turned his head. Something moved in the darkness. He raised the gun. His hand was shaking. He took one step backward. Then another. The sound came again. Slow. Careful. A claw dragging across the floor. Ethan stared into the darkness. And suddenly he understood. The footsteps outside had never been a real danger. The cameras had never been the real danger. Daniel had never been the real danger. Even Elias had never been the real danger. The trap had never been the net. The trap had been the house. The isolation. The grief. The loneliness. The curse. And perhaps the worst part was that Ethan had walked into it willingly. The scratching stopped. Ethan whispered. Daniel. No answer. Then, from somewhere inside the darkness, came a breath. Slow. Deep. Almost human. Ethan didn't move. His eyes adjusted. A shape stood at the end of the hallway. Too tall. Too still. Watching him. Ethan raised the gun. The figure took one step forward. Ethan's finger tightened around the trigger. Then the lights went out. Everything disappeared. The house became completely black. And for the first time since Ethan had arrived, he heard something that sounded almost like a human voice. His own voice. Whispering from the darkness. Don't open the door. Ethan froze. Because he recognized the words. Daniel had said them. But Daniel wasn't there. At least he wasn't supposed to be. The voice came again. Closer this time. Don't open the door. Ethan turned toward the front entrance. The door was closed. Locked. He could see it faintly in the darkness. Then came 3 slow knocks. Knock. 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 Ethan stood motionless. Another 3 knocks. Knock. 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 He didn't answer. He didn't move. Then a voice spoke from the other side. Ethan. Daniel. It sounded exactly like him. Ethan closed his eyes. No. Ethan, open the door. He stepped backward. No. The voice became desperate. It's me. Ethan shook his head. You're not Daniel. Silence. Then laughter. Not human laughter. Something low. Something patient. Something that had been waiting for him to say those words. The voice changed. Pah. Ethan slowly looked toward the hallway. The shape was gone. The house was empty. He looked back at the door. The voice whispered. You finally learned. Ethan didn't understand. Then something touched his shoulder. He turned. The screen cuts to black. There is no scream. No confirmation. No explanation. Only darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, a final breath. Long. Slow. Almost relieved. Almost like a man falling asleep. Or like a creature finally coming home. The sound fades. And the forest remains. Waiting. Because some traps are built to catch animals. Some are built to catch people. And some are built long before the victim ever realizes they have stepped inside. Ethan Hale thought he had moved into the forest to escape his past. He thought the house was empty. He thought the creature was outside. He was wrong. The house had never been empty. The creature had never been far away. And the thing waiting for him had never needed to break through the door. It had only needed him to open it himself. This is a fictional horror story created for entertainment purposes. The events and characters in the story are not real. If you enjoy horror stories and dark mysteries, subscribe to the channel for more.